Tax administrators advocate flexible tax for West African sub-region. Nigerian equities lead global rally with 1.7 trillion naira gain in 5 days. And on Commodity Watch, gold dips as dollar gains on China COVID risk. This is Business Express on the network service of the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Musa Abubakar, your guide. Now let's bring you up to speed with business development. To surmount tax challenges within sub-Saharan Africa, tax administrators are advocating flexible tax policies in line with global tax administration trends. This was the position of economic actors at the 42nd Annual Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators in Abuja. Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Minister of Finance and other tax experts say the funding of equitable solutions will strengthen taxation policies.
In the face of evolving global and domestic socio-economic challenges, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari has deliberately taken some strategic steps in creating a conducive environment for business activities to thrive and encouraging foreign direct investment. These measures include the provision of trade and investment incentives, review of tax policies, and legislation to improve on tax certainty and fairness, and implementation of our Ease of Doing Business program.
It is important for Qatar and similar organizations to lend their voice with ours to insist that skewed international tax rules should be straightened out for the good of all. Since businesses are evolving from the physical presence to virtual place, tax administrations must also shift gear into the virtual realm. I'm hoping that this conference will discuss and recommend solutions to issues that include digitization of tax administration,
Corruption, inflation, insecurity, and unfriendly citizens' financial policies were part of issues raised needing attention to tackle taxation, or rather tax evasion, which is the most common challenge of taxation. Experts call for re-engineering of tax process amongst African countries to foster ease of doing business. Now, after about 8 months of suspension of operations of the Abuja to Kaduna standard train services, the Minister of Transportation, Muazu Jaji Sambo, says movement will not start until intending passengers are familiar with the new measures introduced in purchasing tickets. Oyinaya Kalu-Oka reports that the minister made this known while on an assessment tour from Idu Station in Abuja to Rigasa in Kaduna.
The guarantee I'm giving Nigerians to use this train is really guaranteed. Secondly, I also want to make sure that the Nigerian public are sufficiently enlightened about the new procedure for buying tickets. You don't buy a ticket unless you have a valid phone number and you have an NIN, giving Nigerians full assurance that a human being can give that this train is safe for them to use. There is absolutely nothing to fear. Increased number of security personnel. And I tell you, without mincing words, some of these security personnel may not even be wearing uniform. On every journey, the train is monitored every second on a screen. And the train driver can see up to a certain distance if there is any threat on the track. That will enable him match the brakes long before getting to the perceived threat.
Recently, the federal government, through the National Bureau of Statistics and other development partners, unveiled the 2022 Multidimensional Poverty Index survey to assess poverty levels in the country with the aim of alleviating it. My colleague Benny Adams earlier had a discussion on the survey. And joining me to discuss the 2022 Poverty Index, the Director of ICT of the National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. B. Fafumi. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you very much.
Also joining me is the National Coordinator of the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the Presidency, Shala Afolaya. You're also welcome to Business Express.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, MPI. What is this index all about? I hear by this categorization, I am also poor. Can you break this down for us?
Exactly. So I must say that the Multidimensional Poverty Index is a new way of understanding poverty. And this is not new in the world because over 100 countries are already implementing this way of looking at poverty beyond just monetary and income-based, consumption-based poverty measurement. And what does this mean? Just like you have rightly said, just looking at you and just wearing nice suit, but if you go back home, do you have access to electricity, constant electricity? Do you have access to quality water, good water? Your children, do they go to school? Do you have, what is the distance between your home and the primary healthcare centers that you should, be able to access if you need health intervention? Those are the kind of multi-dimensional way we should begin to look at poverty. Instead of if I earn $1.90, that means I'm poor or I'm not poor. But in a multi-dimensional way where the basic needs and living standards that people should access, they don't access them. So what we did was Nigeria joined the other countries that are looking at it in a multi-dimensional way, and because it is the way to track SDG 1. So if you look at SDG 1 says to eradicate extreme poverty, not just extreme poverty, but extreme poverty in all of its forms. We have only looked at in the monetary terms before. So Nigeria is now looking at it in all of its forms, and when we address it, all of the dimensions, then we know that we are addressing poverty in all of its, from the grassroots. And what do we look at in terms of the national MPI that we have conducted in Nigeria? We looked at health care, we looked at education, we looked at living standards, and we looked at works and shocks. In terms of works and shocks, because of the insecurity in the country, a lot of businesses are, impacted by that. So what is the impact of that to business activities, to economic growth? You look at healthcare, you look at education. I've done some examples of that. And also the way people, access to water, access to the way they even cook. Because it's quite alarming that a lot of Nigerians still cook with, I'm not even talking about the climate change issue, but people cook with dung, like cow dung. Then you have the wood, you have charcoal. It's quite alarming that we that live in the city don't know how people are impacted, very severely in terms of that. So,
okay, so sorry to cut you, talking about the impacts that some people have access to modern ways of using energy, some actually don't have. I want to throw this question to Mr. Fafumi. You're the Director of ICT. These figures, how did the NBS come up with these figures?
Thank you very much. And let me first thank NTA for giving us this opportunity.
We are partners in progress.
Yeah, because we are partners. And again, one of the critical component of our data production is dissemination. And of what use is data that is produced that people are not having access to. So, and that is why I'm thanking you for giving us this audience to let Nigeria know what we have done in MPI and what MPI stand for, so that all of us will know whether we are multidimensionally poor or we are.
That's why you should tell us, tell Nigerians the figures now.
So
how did you come about such analysis? She said it's not a new way of doing it, the multinational, the multidimensional approach to it. It's actually new. Why did we adopt this, and how is it working for us? And how did you come about these numbers?
Yeah, well, how did we come about this is that, let me first tell you from what she has just explained, because what we used to know is the monetary aspect of poverty, income and consumption. So, but now we are looking beyond just income and consumption. We are looking at deprivation of people to all these basic needs that people supposed to have access to. So for us in NBS, we come up with a questionnaire that was administered to individual household. For example, we went around the 109 senatorial districts in the country.
Okay.
And in each of these senatorial districts, we cover what we call 34 enumeration areas. And within these enumeration areas, we also selected 15 households. And the questionnaire was administered to household and individual in this enumeration area and household. And at the end of the day, we now analyze the data and come up with the figure that we have. So what we have here is that we have the dimensions. Each of the dimensions has their own weight. Take for example, head has its own weight.
Access to electricity.
So access to electricity, access to education, and so on and so forth. Each of the indicators there has its own weight. Then we now look at the data, the responses from individual, and we add weight to all this, and we analyze this. At the end of the day, we come up with what we now have as the incidence of poverty. So we are able to get the incidence of poverty, which tells us how many people or the percentage of people that are multidimensionally poor. So, and from there, we now also look into what we call the intensity of the
level of poverty.
Of the level of poverty. That is the poor among the poor. So we now multiply the incidence with the intensity to have what we call the multidimensional poverty index.
Wow, that's quite a work put in here. Okay, Mrs. Sola, I want to get to understand. This is the 2022 figure. From when did we start this? And can you speak to some of these figures? Like he said, we have electricity, we have access to education, we have access to health. Can you give us some breakdown with numbers attached to it? Let me know whether I'm actually part of it or not.
Yeah, but so I know you have done your research quite well, and so what we have done is we have distilled the information, like Mr. B had mentioned. So for the first time, we are making sure that the data is accessible to people, and there is a website that is captured. If you permit me, I can just say that is www.nigeriapovertymap.com, where you can access all of the data broken down in charts and in map. But the very high level ones, we know that 63% of Nigerians are multidimensionally poor.
63.
63% of Nigerians are multidimensionally poor. And if we look at that in terms of population, we're in, compared to 211 million as our population, that would mean about 133 million Nigerians are poor. But there is quite interesting, it gets interesting when you look, when you begin to do the breakdown. Where are these poor people resident? They are resident within rural areas, because we have 72% of Nigerians that are poor within rural areas. And like Mr. B had mentioned, these surveys were conducted in senatorial district, 109 senatorial district. And what does that mean? It wasn't federal medical centers that they went to. They went to primary healthcare centers. So if the result is telling us that of these, of the people, total people that are poor in Nigeria that have been identified as 133 million, 106 million of them are in rural areas. And then that begins to ask, beg for a lot of questions and conversations at subnational level. So a lot of, conversations should begin to hold at subnational level. And we have the results around the child poverty, because 80% of the surveys that was conducted, we have 80% of children that are poor, and it's quite alarming when you look at that. So government needs to, and I'm not saying federal government alone, but at subnational, at local government chairmen, that we let off the hook, and also state government need to look at those figures. But I can go on and on in terms of figures, but that figures is out there at the MBS website, or the e-library, and also the more colorful, friendlier version that is out there in the public.
Mr. Afafumi, you deal with some of these figures. Yeah. You're in charge of ICT. What does this index mean for policymakers?
Thank you very much. It's telling the policymaker the direction to which they should focus, maybe in terms of budgeting, in terms of planning, even in terms of having public-private partnership, because through this figure we know where people are being deprived. Then if government want to do any kind of project or program, then it should be tailored towards that area of deprivation. And that is what these figures is telling us. And as she has just said, it varies from state to state. What might be the deprivation, highest deprivation in state A could
not be the same
in state B. So it's also telling government, even at sub-national level, what to do. It could be access to water in this region. It could be schooling. Out of school pupils, that should be the focus of another region in the country. So for government policy makers, these figures is telling a lot for us as a policy, to them as a policy maker, and then again it will help us to manage the resources that the government is having, so that it will be judiciously expended. So this is some of the policy implication of these figures.
Okay, like you mentioned, a lot of these challenges in the subnationals, talking about the states, the local government, particularly the rural environment. And now we know government at the subnationals are challenged with a lot of issues of resources. Governments are borrowing monies to actually pay salaries of workers. Those are their employees. Then getting to touch the rural poor is actually a challenge. Where do you think, or how do you think this issue, this poverty issue, this poverty trap can be escaped, particularly from the rural populace? Your suggestion?
Personally, as a suggestion, we know that people at the rural area, they just need some little intervention for them to get out of poverty. We are saying that majority of them are into agriculture. We make maybe fertilizer available to them, so, and that will improve on their production. Then we make road available to them. After their harvest, they have opportunity of taking this to the market, and they sell their goods, and they will be able now to send their children to schools. Then we have rural
community health centers.
Community health centers.
The primary health care.
Primary care, that they don't need to walk 30 1 hour before they get access to health facility. And these are simple things that government can do to the rural area, and they will escape this poverty trap that we are talking about.
Well, Shola Afolayan, you are from the presidency. You have a lot of data available. What happens to this data in terms of policy implementation?
So thank you for asking me again around policy implementation. I must also circle back to, or let me say, re-emphasize the need for subnational ownership and accountability. So federal government does a lot of intervention. So it's called intervention because something is going off track and somebody needs to intervene. You see, the government had rolled out the most expansive social protection project, and is supported 5 million people out of poverty. Then that is homegrown school feeding, Empower, the NC group of programs, which targeted households. And you will see that even some of this intervention, we needed states. The federal government needed states to sign MOU and agree, because federal government cannot go into the jurisdiction of states to just implement. So you see, even for the homegrown school feeding, some states did not sign up because federal government wanted to feed primary 1 to 3 and state needed to feed primary 4 to 5 because of school dropout. And those are the things that were picked up within the survey. So that's just one. The other thing that government had done now for the 2023 budget, if you see the top 5 priority top priority projects within the budget, it covers health, education, security, and social protection, because this is the result that the MPI is saying that needs to be addressed, and federal government has taken that on. So what we are doing now is to support other states, the bottom 6 states that have the highest poverty rate, to support them in terms of how can you also make sure that your budgeting process addresses, you are not just arbitrarily, awarding or allocating resources. How can you make sure that the resources are targeting the poverty? The other thing, just sitting today and reading the newspaper that the FAC allocation, it was over 700 billion that was sent to states. So those are the things that federal government does in terms of revenue that is shared among states. So what are these things being used for? Security votes, what are they being used for? And federal government were the one that actually, advocated for the autonomous
autonomy of the local legislation and local government.
Of local government. You see that these rural people are there. So in terms of addressing poverty in its roots, so that we can move the needle, and then maybe in another year or 2 years that you can ask us what is the comparative analysis about that, because this is just the baseline result. Then when state governments and subnationals are doing all of these things, it will work. Federal government is intervening, is doing the leadership, is supporting. What are the subnational government doing? And I can go on and on. For instance, also the National Social Register that has the database for all of the poor and vulnerable in Nigeria. What we have done is to make sure that the MPI, so the people that have been collected by MBS on the field and have been identified as multidimensionally poor, that we excluded before because they are not income poor, that we are now making that alignment within the NSR. The NSR has over 12 million, I want to think, of households that we have that we can target. So we have private sector, the Dangote Foundation, the private, all of those people can go in there and say, I want to address things around child development and nutrition. That figure is there. So federal government is quite doing a lot.
Those involved are also watching and they are listening to you, and you also have the presidency right here in the studio. Well, it's been a pleasure having you, the ICT Director, NBS, Mr. B. Fafumi, for sharing your thoughts with us at this particular point in time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
And the National Coordinator, MPI, the Presidency, Shola Afolayan, thank you so very much for sharing such deep thoughts with us at this particular point in time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'd love to have you both come back here again so that we'll get to talk about it, possibly if we get to see a review.
Thank you.
We'll be there. Thank you.
Well,
Thank
moving
you.
on, Business Express continues after this break.
Well, this is where we end this episode of the program. Don't forget you can access all previous episodes on YouTube. Do join us again tomorrow, Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. I am Musa Abubakar.